what immediately comes up for me when I'm talking about product market fit is target addressable audience, right? PMF and TAM kind of go hand in hand.
Yep.
And like a lot of companies initially, they're kind of boiling the ocean with the product market fit, right? Anybody could use this. But your salesperson, that doesn't do them any favors, right? Because then I'm trying to boil the ocean and I'm not going to get the quality touch points and yada yada yada. We can kind of go down that road. So I think it's imperative for companies to really kind of look at product market fit along with target addressable market. Who are we really, really helping, right? Like who's that exact audience? Not to shrink it like too small, but small enough to where you can really make a concerted effort to go after this audience.
Welcome to the Growth Blueprint, the podcast where B2B executives get the insights they need to scale profitable companies. I'm your host, Mario Peshev, analyzing data from over 500 portfolio companies, interviewing top B2B experts, and writing the new playbooks that work. If you're a B2B leader looking to drive growth and operational efficiency, you're in the right place. No fluff, just data-driven insights, expert advice you can act on today. Hit subscribe, stay tuned, let's dive in. Hey everyone, I'm really happy to welcome Chris Henrotin here today with me on the show. Hi Chris, how are you doing?
I'm doing fantastic. How about yourself?
Well, living the life, especially on a Monday as we're recording this. So first off, before we kick this off, so Chris is the Director of Business Development in Playbook Media, which is a growth consultancy I'm really pleased with. They've revolutionized a lot of things in growth marketing, in paid media, in performance marketing. So some of the topics that we're going to touch on. One of the interesting things about Chris that I cannot really miss the opportunity to mention is Chris is one of the first 1,000 employees in Google. He spent, I believe, over a decade in the company, around 10 years or so. So that's been very impressive. And I'm pretty sure that we're going to hear some of the insights that have shaped Google as a company and kind of the authority and the monopoly in the space in so many different angles, including YouTube, where we're hosting this channel originally. So Chris, tell me a little bit about yourself and about your current role, and what are you doing on a day-to-day nowadays?
Yeah, so currently I pretty much head up sales for Playbook Media. They've never really had a sales arm to the business, or it was very much founder-led sales for the last 7 years. So they brought me on to help with the growth of the company and try to bring on some more clients. And yeah, I've been there a little bit over 5 months now. So I've pretty much settled into the role. And like you alluded to a little bit earlier, I'll give you kind of a quick primer on my background and history if you want to do that right now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So Google was my first real job out of college. I found it on hotjobs.com, which I don't even think is in existence any longer. But yeah, I mean it was a different scene back then, right? Google was kind of this funky little internet company that you'd use for searches, and we at the time were actually behind Yahoo in terms of ad market share, which is kind of pretty wild to think about. So obviously the company exploded. It is what it is today. What I can say about the growth there is there was always at least while I was there, they tried to keep a very, very strong entrepreneurial spirit at Google, which was pretty cool. You could definitely allocate some of your time to kind of projects outside of your, the scope of responsibilities that they hired you for, which was pretty cool. And that kind of kept it, being like a very lively environment. And obviously all the perks that you see on TV and in movies, it is accurate. The 3 meals a day, the crazy holiday trips and renting out Squaw Valley and that kind of stuff. It all happened. Yeah. So they do treat their employees incredibly well. But really, as a first kind of sales job, having a company that already had some brand equity in the space, it's not like selling for a startup. And that's what I got into after 10 years at Google. Is I joined a mobile analytics startup called Navo. And at the time, what we were doing is selling basically mobile data. So we were able to identify how frequently people were logging into apps, how long they were using those apps, et cetera, et cetera. And one of the first players in the space, but nobody knew who we were, right? So that was the first time being a salesperson without having any brand equity at all, right? So going to market without anybody knowing the brand or what we did. So I would say like that was kind of like my first like real step into sales. And so I stayed in the startup environment for the next 10 years selling various MarTech and enterprise SaaS platforms. And then the last 3 years, I pivoted back into performance marketing. So working for a couple growth agencies.
That's very exciting. And I definitely love to tap into the performance marketing space because it's something that's definitely in demand, especially nowadays where results are not really showing up. Customer acquisition cost payback times are insane. Some of the channels are simply underperforming. And kind of one of the things that we see, especially over the past weeks, is that the political campaigns are definitely playing out. And we're
Yep.
seeing thousands of campaigns launching within a week from some of the candidates. So that's without getting into kind of that realm, it's definitely a space that I'm kind of very interested in. And to just double click on the kind of 20% rule of Google that you mentioned, we are seeing that in the WordPress space as well in a similar fashion. Just last week, we had WordCamp US, which is kind of one of the largest events in the space. And there has been some beef with some of the largest hosting companies not contributing enough to WordPress. So I'm not going to be the kind of the judge of that, like who's right or who's wrong, but there's definitely the need to to deliver more for your job and for additional kind of satellite activities. Be a community citizen, contribute back to open source, work on pet projects, kind of improve some tooling, organize meetups. There's so many other different angles that we as kind of B2B leaders and organizations have to be contributing at and delivering additional value, because it's not just the 9 to 5 job and the capital and kind of increasing revenue and growth, but it's also kind of leaving a legacy in one way or another. But since we are again touching on the performance side of the marketing, tell me, what are you seeing over the past few months in terms of demand? Like what are existing clients coming up with when reaching out to you, or when you're meeting? Kind of what are the main problems in the space that you're seeing today?
Yeah. I mean, I think for the most part, what we see a lot of is just diminishing returns on current ad channels. At some point, everybody's going to experience diminishing returns, right? And then it's
Yep.
kind of like, what do I do next? Do I reinvest in that channel? Do I tap into new channels? How can I unlock kind of that next pocket of growth? And so we really believe it's a combination of things. Like, in fact, we're actually doing a webinar tomorrow with Meta and Rockerbox talking about reinvesting into brand to help drive more demand and bring people into the later stages of the funnel, right?
That's pretty
Because
cool. Yeah.
yeah, because if we're not tapping into new audiences, then are we really growing the business, right? We see a lot of brands over investing in bottom of funnel. And what can happen where you see the diminishing returns is just like you said, we see rising CPMs, right? Because there's more
Yep.
competition competing for last click and conversion and all that good stuff. But B, are we converting people that would have converted anyway, right? Is it kind of,
Mhm.
are we wasting money, right? So we as an agency are very conscientious and always searching for possible diminishing returns, and then really coming up with the solution of how to reinvest those funds. And typically it's going to be top of funnel or channel expansion where we can tap into new audiences, right? And a lot of our clients are B2C, whether it's, B2C services or e-commerce. And so, fortunately there's a wealth of new channels to activate, right? Like TikTok's obviously caught a ton of attention, Snap's out there, Pinterest, a lot of those, even Reddit's talked about. But we want to do it in kind of like a systematic way so that we're not just burning money on new ad channels, right? We're going to want to test incrementality and all that good stuff. So that's probably the biggest thing. I think what comes with that too is if you're testing out some of these new ad channels, it requires different types of creative, right? A creative on Facebook isn't necessarily going to be as high performance as TikTok, right? They require like there's subtle nuances to it, or actually not so subtle nuances to it, to be
Most
perfectly
definitely.
honest, right? And so that's another thing that we want to make sure of, is that there's a healthy pipeline of fresh creative to test into A, new audiences, B, new channels, and C, at every stage of the funnel.
One of the things that we are noticing here, and again, I mentioned the elections, and we do see diminishing returns. First off, over the past year, particularly on both on Google and Meta and LinkedIn as well. By the way, part of that is due to the macro environment, everything that we're seeing in the B2B space, and that's definitely playing out. There's no question about that. We just saw the Fed decreasing the interest rate by 50 basis points, so that's something that's definitely positive. However, we also know that historically recessions often happen after the first cut, so most people are still cautious, and investments are still kind of in flux. Additionally, we're just entering Q4, right, as we speak, and we know this is kind of the biggest win for most businesses for various reasons. And however, we also see that brands are not necessarily well prepared due to them being more reserved and cutting back and slashing budgets and not investing that much in paid media, and also in kind of brand adoption over the past 9 months, which is another kind of big question mark of what's going to happen in Q4 and kind of how our budget is going to be optimized and adjusted over the coming year. And one of the interesting topics that we about discussed prior to the show, and I think it's kind of a good one to be tackling over the podcast today, is cutting through the noise in a saturated or a competitive market. Because both you at Playbook Media are doing a lot of agency work. You're essentially a B2B business providing services for other businesses. My agency, it's a Martech GTM agency, which is doing work for B2Bs as well. And we know how hard it is to stand out, and we know how hard it is for our businesses to differentiate themselves in such a competitive space. So this is a good one to kind of kick it off with. So first off, what are the biggest trends, and kind of what's the reason we are seeing that massive differentiation or lack of it whatsoever for existing businesses? And how is this space, when did that space become so crowded? Did we miss a point at some point of the journey? And how are we tackling all of that?
Yeah, I don't know when it happened. I think it happened a long time ago, to be honest.
Mhm.
I think a lot of new agencies came into the scene when Meta was just there to cherry pick, and they could get incredible like CVRs and CPAs for their clients, right?
True story.
And
Yep.
and really kind of demonstrate like, hey, we're doing a great job. But I think it's happened over time. I mean, even when I was at Google on the ad side, there was a wealth of agencies that we were managing, right? And I didn't really know what kind of differentiated one from the next, right? And I think that's really the challenge, right? It's you know a piece of software, sometimes you can find kind of the unique differentiators. It's not always easy, but sometimes there's something like a little bit revolutionary to the product that you can go to market with, right?
Mhm.
And sometimes that can kind of be the hook to get in front of, well, on the SaaS side, it's typically IT leaders. Sometimes if you're selling MarTech, then it's the marketing leaders. But you kind of know the drill there. On the agency side, it's a different story, right? You're doing great work, but how do you kind of articulate that in a manner that's going to present you as being kind of unique and revolutionary? And I think that's a challenge for a lot of agencies right now. And I don't think we've figured out exactly how to differentiate us. Like, certainly we have a great track record. I can talk about the marketing science that kind of goes into it, and all that stuff, but sometimes that's not enough to really position ourselves as being truly unique. I think what I've learned as a salesperson, because I've always been on the sales side of things, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
And don't get me wrong, at some of the early stage startups, you wear a ton of different hats, and I've been on the market, help out in different areas. But I think that if I'm speaking to salespeople or sales leaders or revenue leaders, I think the biggest kind of unlock for us is, even if you don't find that very unique point of differentiation, you can always provide value to your audience, right? And Mario, you do a great job of that in your LinkedIn posts, and I'm sure you're syndicating content in other places as well. We're kind of finding that too. We're having more success in these webinars, to be honest, right? we're not the agency that has like 200 logos and I can pick out a case study that's like super specific to whatever sub vertical. We just don't have that, right? But we do have the ability to present a ton of value. And so that's really what I've leaned into predominantly, like with our relationships with the channels, right? So doing webinars with TikTok, doing webinars with Meta, that kind of stuff, because it's kind of instant credibility, right? If the channels trust us and we trust the channels, then there's something going on there. But B, we're not really pitching anything, right? I think a lot of the buyers don't want to be pitched anymore. They don't want to be closed. They want to be educated, right? I think gone are the days of like, firing up an email sequence and just kind of fingers crossed I'm going to get some demos out of it or some discovery calls out of it. I think just because of the proliferation of emails and cold calls that are happening nowadays, these buyers, these leaders are getting inundated every single day with the same message. And so education is the angle, at least, that we've found some success with in terms of just opening the doors to conversations. Doesn't mean that we're going to get that discovery call or that pitch presentation scheduled right away, but at least there's an open dialogue going.
There's so much to unpack here. I don't even know where to start. But first and foremost, again, you mentioned, I've been in sales for most of my kind of lifetime, even though, again, you mentioned marketing, kind of some of the other roles. And of course, we all wear multiple hats, especially in a startup environment. But the connotation of kind of the car salesman and how tricky it is to just escape from that picture of, my gosh, I have to talk to another salesperson again, right? And at the same time, education is so necessary. And with someone like you, with, again, 15 plus 16, 17, whatever it is, years of successful track record in the space, in kind of the same B2B performance marketing environment, 10 years at Google, several other startups, you do possess a wealth of knowledge which could be instrumental to a great business to just really map a solution to their core kind of value proposition, to their roadmap, to their goals, to their KPIs. And it just requires all that expertise. And we've kind of escaped from that by just plugging inexperienced SDRs, dialing phones, or AI agents, just making all these calls, which is super unfortunate. And in terms of channels, because again, the space is super saturated, and I'm just kind of throwing some points here, and you can kind of cherry pick after. But first, we met through a channel that's less known or less common. I'm really big on Slack communities, and we actually met on Efficient Growth, which was kind of just common conversations in channels around the space, which was very natural, very organic. We actually spoke to Playbook Media a couple years ago in one of my fractional roles with one of the businesses, because we needed arbitrage experienced performance marketing company that can deliver. And we actually, I believe, we made an experiment with that for kind of one of our channels and one of our ad accounts. So it's interesting, because when you think of, hey, traditional agency has to do hardcore pitching, oftentimes by paid media, direct to a business. Oftentimes there's so many other angles and different channels and different initiatives that happen, and so many other touch points before a transaction even happens. So what are some channels that kind of make sense to you? You mentioned webinars, and I definitely do agree. Webinars are still a great way to educate, to sell without selling, to just present what's possible and convey know-how, and just say, hey, this is the playbook. If you want to spend the next 5 months studying and trial and error, great. If you want to start tomorrow, this is what we've been using for years. So, just hire us. Simple as that.
Yeah. I mean, you gave me some good recommendations, and we've seen some of those bear fruit as well. I have this kind of executive coach that I work with, and one of the big things that he really hammers in on is do what the other people aren't doing. And what a lot of people aren't doing, particularly SDRs, is actually going out into the field and meeting people, right? That's kind of been lost with the digital age, right? Everybody's kind of reliant upon emails and maybe some cold calls. Is what happened to good old fashioned networking out in, real person. So we've seen some success with that too. I do think it's worth discussing, like, once you mentioned kind of like the hardcore pitch of the agency, and I'm like adamantly against like the hardcore pitch. I just I really think, and this is for anybody that's either getting into sales or struggling with sales. There's a lot of stuff being passed around these days as far as kind of like sales cheat sheets, discovery list downloads, all that stuff. A lot of stuff to like learn and memorize. For me, all that stuff can get kind of thrown out the window if you go into the conversation with a genuine curiosity about the company and the person that you're talking to. If you go in with a genuine curiosity, naturally, you're asking the types of questions that are going to yield the answers that kind of give you the data to actually properly align what your product or service can do to help them.
One of the great things I want to double click on is you mentioned how important it is to actually meet customers and kind of be out there in the field more or less and meet people and not just be random robocall hitting their phone numbers, and also doubling in education. So I'm actually one of the videos I'm going to post over the next week or two, kind of depending on backlog, is a review of Iconic's GTM, B2B SaaS, kind of the state of go to market. And it's going to kind of cover how the space shifted over the past year. Iconic, they do manage, I believe it's an $80 billion fund or so. So it's a pretty massive kind of conglomerate with companies like, well, so many unicorns that we have all heard of. But kind of one of the interesting things, and I just opened up the report here, is in terms of primary sales motion, what they compare 2023 to 2024 is in 2023, among their portfolio of companies and a few others, field sales represent 27%, hybrid 16%, and inside sales 56%. So over half was inside, field was about 25, 27% in that case, and hybrid was a tiny portion. In 2024, what they noticed is that inside sales shrunk from 56 to 24%. Field sales, solely field, slightly dropped to 21%, but hybrid represented over 55% of all of the efforts. So what does this go to tell us is that the times of just dialing numbers and emailing people are over. Also, the entire pandemic kind of behavior is over, and FaceTime is one of the most important things on the planet. We just
Yeah.
need to connect and kind of demonstrate knowledge and kind of educate and help support and introduce and kind of build connections and build relationships with our customers, which was, again, we always knew it's important, but now it's far more important in 2024 and the year to come.
Yeah, well, I like that you mentioned hybrid, right? Because I personally I haven't had a ton of success if I just show up at a conference.
Yep.
But if I'm strategic about it and I do my prospecting and I do my outreach ahead of time to try and secure meetings or at least get on people's radar, then I'm much more successful while I'm at the actual conference. And then obviously you have post-conference follow-up and all that good stuff too. So yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of like using the technology to your advantage, but actually putting in the legwork to get out there and meet people. I think that doesn't surprise me that the hybrid is starting to kind of overtake the other categories.
And yeah, absolutely. It's not about, especially in B2B sales, it usually takes dozens of touch points until you close a sale. You can, it's not a direct to consumer, you're selling,
You're not selling a
candy.
t-shirt. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, it's a no-brainer.
Yeah.
It's a $10 purchase. You need to click and get it delivered overnight shipping, right?
Right.
So it's far more complicated. Additionally, with services, the other challenge we are dealing with, and you said that earlier, with a product, you can at least take a peek and kind of figure out what's the USP, kind of what's the differentiator. You can play to that. You can amplify it. You can, just put all the headlights into that specific unique value proposition. And it's pretty clear and people can try, they can see demos and so forth. With services, it's far different. And even with the same agency, you can get like 5 different types of services delivered to client for different reasons. People in the agency may be different. The times may be different, busier times versus slower times. Could be sick leaves or someone kind of dealing with something. It's so much harder with a service-based business. And that doesn't just mean agencies, but everyone. Like you work with contractors, realtors, brokers, even doctors, and like everyone else. So that lack of predictability requires a lot more due diligence. In fact, Sixth Sense and their survey, I believe from earlier this year or late last year, they also showcase that the average B2B deal now takes about a year, and the first 8 months is just due diligence. It's just literally doing research and shortlisting, and then after month 8, there's actually the shortlisting process, reaching out to the top 2, 3, 4 vendors, and then kind of doing the rest of the dance. But it's you can't just do field sales. You can't show up and close a deal. But it's definitely impossible to just shoot emails and expect to build a genuine relationship.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it, again, like you said, it's really increasing the touch points as much as you can. Because, I mean, whether it be a new CRM software or a new marketing agency, depending on when you make contact with the person, they could be mid contract, they could be beginning contract, or they could be at end of contract. Timing is probably the biggest indicator of whether or not something's going to actually manifest into a new opportunity, right? So, that being said, you want to kind of make sure that you have consistent touch points along the way so that you stay on the radar.
Love it. And I manage different companies, but Devrich is kind of one of my bigger projects. So we've been around for 15 years and we are full service. So we do everything from tech to design to go to market to SEO. And like we have kind of, juggling with lots of different things. And we do that depending on demand. And again, 2-3 years ago, R&D was something that everyone was investing in, VC funds, new startups, innovation, metaverse, and so on. And then it suddenly dropped end of 2022, and everyone was scrambling with, hey, our channels are no longer working. We counted 70% of our revenue on SEO, now it's no longer working. We need a new GTM plan and so on. And that's kind of what we've been doing primarily over the past 2 years. And again, in a couple of years, when it's kind of back in play and funding is back, we're still going to do R&D, right? So it's kind of depends on where money goes. But the main problem over the past, especially year and a half, almost 2 years, is almost every single client of ours is going through major, not just go through market transformations, but even reinventing their product market fit.
Yep.
Because times are different. AI has played a significant role.
I was just going to bring up product market fit.
Yeah. And that's, I think we know where I'm headed here, but times are different and most clients are dealing with a completely different ecosystem, even more different than just moving at home due to the pandemic and then kind of going back. And now we're facing that work from home versus return to office. But let's chat about product market fit first. And then kind of we're going to dive into what are you doing as an agency to help your clients redefine offers and kind of build more transformative solutions, because this is kind of one of the key aspects of what a performance marketing and just the performance agency specializes at. So I'd love to kind of hear from you on that front. But let's start with PMF first.
What immediately comes up for me when I'm talking about product market fit is target addressable audience, right? PMF and TAM kind of go hand in hand. And like a lot of companies initially, they're kind of boiling the ocean with the product market fit, right? Anybody could use this. But your salesperson, that doesn't do them any favors, right? Because then I'm trying to boil the ocean and I'm not going to get the quality touch points and yada, yada, yada. We can kind of go down that road. So I think it's imperative for companies to really kind of look at product market fit along with target addressable market. Who are we really, really helping, right? Like who's that exact audience? Not to shrink it like too small, but small enough to where you can really make a concerted effort to go after this audience with all your marketing materials, your sales materials, all that good stuff, right? Again, I think if the product market fit and the TAM, if the TAM's a little bit, if it's too wide, too vague, you're never going to know how to actually sell into the market, right? That's truly a case of just throwing spaghetti against the wall and seeing what sticks, right? So I think it's important to remain conscientious when determining product market fit. Who is the actual TAM? What are their challenges that I'm trying to solve? How do I actually solve that? Who am I competing against? Understand that target buyer, that target company, and the more information that you have in terms of that kind of research is going to set your marketing and sales channels up for success.
Love it. And that's actually something I covered. And that was this year after after 5 years, and just a casual plug, but writing my MBA Disrupted book is something that I finally spent the time with, even though I've been writing it since 2019. So it's been kind of long overdue, but I've probably allocated 50 pages on identifying your niche, product market fit, a lot of research, qualitative, quantitative research, primary, secondary, and so forth, product definition, market definition, offer definition, so many of these just because it's so imperative to build a product and to build it right. And one of the reasons I did it this year is you're talking about TAM, and you need to understand what your total addressable market is. You need to understand your ICP and kind of what your ICP does and kind of what they need. And that's kind of always been the case, even with, many of the leaders in the space, Eric Ries with the Lean Startup and many of the other program essays, all of them and kind of the Y Combinator motion,
Yeah,
all of that
yeah.
leads to PMF, ICP, bundle them together and work with it. The most surprising and the most kind of innovative, groundbreaking, disruptive thing that we saw this year is and I'm speaking to the agency and my consultancies, we do have ongoing recurring clients. They're our ICP, they're the right TAM. We provide the right kind of value proposition in the sense of we offer services to help expand and kind of grow B2Bs from like our firmographics, demographics, and everything. So all of that was in place, and suddenly, at the snap of the finger, 70% of our businesses stopped being able to sell what they used to sell previously. So there was there's what do you offer to whom, and kind of, the product market fit with the ICP alignment, and suddenly what our customers were doing and selling failed miserably, right? Their product definition, their offer, their channel, all of that was just halted. So all that we've been doing over the past year and a half is reinventing offers, reinventing pricing plans, repackaging solutions into something else, going to other channels that previously weren't explored, and so on, which was the most surprising things I've never believed would ever happen. Because as someone who's in charge, like the executive seats in the business, and you know that very well, you have all of that playbook, you know who you chase, you have your for account-based marketing or whatever it is, you know who you chase, they're the right client, you know that you need to provide services, and suddenly you can no longer provide that same thing because their entire product and their entire pitch is changing. So how did you handle that internally?
Well, before we get to that, I personally think there's nothing wrong with building a company around a niche,
Yep.
right? Like, let's say travel is like, that's where I get my first few clients. Then I have case studies, I have social proof. Let's continue to go after travel. I know what those clients need. I know how our services align. I now have results that I can show. I don't think there's anything wrong with building a company around a niche. A lot of great companies have done that. But I know a lot of companies initially, they feel that pressure. Like, once we've onboarded a few clients, we need to move upstream, right? We need to
Yep.
go into enterprise. We need to tap into this vertical or that vertical there, because there's just so much money there. I think people rush to that versus, hey, build some credibility around a particular vertical and just kind of like dominate that vertical. Like, nothing wrong with that.
I love it. And I'm going to provide some examples here because kind of part of our kind of company portfolio is, let's say, a social directory that's been making money off of just social subscriptions. Then inflation kicks in, people stop paying for that. But there's a kind of B2B side of the journey. So we're just moving to, hey, we can start monetizing that with low cost plans and subscriptions for businesses because our expensive competitors now are too expensive, but there's a gap that so we kind of sell the same product to like the same, let's say, a marketplace, but we sell different parts of the marketplace. And we're talking 10 million, 20 million, 50, 80, $100 million businesses in kind of different niches. You mentioned CRMs, right? Some of them said, hey, we used to have enterprise sales-led motions for our highest plans with custom integration and stuff. But right now we are going mid-market or even SMEs and selling just a bunch of licenses for our AI chatbots, for example. And we're closing 300% more than we used to with a completely different segment, even though it's the same product, it's just packaged different,
Who's a perfect example of that is, and we'll use the CRM vertical or space, is HubSpot. right?
Mm.
They built their business around SMB. If you recall, do you remember Sugar CRM?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Right? They tried to take Salesforce head on in the
Mm.
enterprise market. I remember when I lived up in the Bay Area, they had all these billboards along the 101, right? So rather than kind of like going after, what could have been a good revenue pocket, they tried to battle for enterprise, and ultimately, I don't know if they're still around today, but obviously they haven't been nearly as successful as like HubSpot, who kind of knew like, hey, you know what? We're going to go after SMBs and we're going to do a really good job doing it.
HubSpot have been a pretty disruptive leader since I got really deep into their inbound marketing and inbound sales back in 2013, 2014. I remember when they repositioned their entire funnel, which was their funnel journey and moving from awareness, consideration, and all that. They said the funnel is broken. Now we have the flywheel because the model's different. Now we don't have kind of D2C top to bottom, but we have recurring revenue. We have advocates. We have ambassadors. And what I see Dharmesh doing over the past year is he's building agent AI, and they're spending so much time on just building AI agents and supplementing the space and reinventing that. So I believe there's a lot going on there that's still going to be disrupting the space. And of course, we know that AI is penetrating pretty much every market.
Yeah.
But
And talk about a company that did a really good job around education and building a community. I
yeah,
mean, whether you're a marketer or a salesperson, pretty much every single search you do on Google, HubSpot's going to have, they're going to appear organically and have whatever guide that they have, right?
pretty much. Yeah. That's incredible. And again, we've taken lots of that from their playbook to ours. Again, on the agency side, we spent 6 years ranking top 3 or top 5 for WordPress agency, WordPress company, and like a lot of these, like dozens of different terms. This was crushed in September with the helpful content update. It's now back with this year's August update. It's been pretty volatile. So some playbooks are working and then they're failing, and you just need to reinvent different channels yourselves. And kind of what I'm curious is, again, what are the key problems that your customers are coming to you with in terms of growth? Because we know, again, performance marketing, we know
Yeah.
the drill behind that, but like, what are the main pain points?
I would say A is diminishing returns, right? They're just not seeing the same returns that they once saw, right? And they want to figure it out before they bleed out all the cash. But B is like they've got to continue to grow their business in a profitable way, and they might not know what to do next. And that's where us being more of like a growth consultancy, like, don't get me wrong, like performance marketing is in our DNA. It's a service that we provide, but we also want to figure out like what is the actual like marketing challenge. It might not be media and creative. It actually might be some other things like reevaluating the product market fit, might be the website, might be a plethora of different things. So what we try to do is really enter the conversation or the partnership thinking more holistically around how we can profitably grow their business, as opposed to, yeah, we just need to optimize these campaigns and toss a few new creative at this channel, right? Because rarely that's going to be the unlock to, fixing the problem.
Yeah, indeed. And it's actually imperative to do that if you're a professional in the space, which of course you are, and the team behind, Playbook, it's definitely something that's telling, because if again, you can't just optimize campaigns for slow landing pages that are not mobile friendly, are not outlining the key value proposition, are not explaining the right problems, don't have the right FAQ, and all of the other questions which are the underlying business model, pricing strategy, and pro description, definition, and all
Well,
that.
that and neglecting life cycle. I mean, you work
Yeah.
you work so hard to get these people to purchase, and then if you don't have a good life cycle campaign going to, A, keep them satisfied, B, upsell, cross sell, etc., or C, get them to become your biggest like brand proponents, like you got to work just as hard on the back end as you do on the front end, just getting them to the website and purchasing something.
What are some of the biggest mistakes that you've seen over the past, say, year, or like in 2024, with businesses just failing to maximize their budgets or do better investments or kind of pivot in the best possible manner?
That's a good question. I would say a lot of companies are still over investing in just one channel instead of really kind of diversifying their budgets. And again, I mean, at some point, every company is going to reach diminishing returns on a single ad channel. All you're doing is just kind of hitting the same audience over and over and over again, right? So I think that's probably the biggest thing. I think the other thing too is, especially for paid social, it really creative is incredibly important. So you never want to get to the point where you're reaching creative fatigue. Always got
Yeah.
to keep it
Mm.
fresh. And it's not just, bottom of funnel or middle of funnel creative. It's top of funnel creative too. So having that robust pipeline of fresh creative, doing the iterative testing to figure out the hooks and the call to actions and all that stuff, I think is imperative if you're investing a lot of money on paid social, and especially if you're also tapping into new channels like TikTok and Snap or Pinterest or some of the ones that don't get the attention of like Meta or Google, right?
And understand what are the underlying principles of the platform, because what works in Meta isn't really working in TikTok.
Exactly. Well, yeah. I mean, I think TikTok, I think they say that 40% of their audience is completely unique from Instagram, right?
Yeah.
Totally
Which,
different demographic.
yeah, which is completely incredible and definitely something to think of, especially as Gen Zs are growing up and actually becoming a viable part of the marketplace.
Well,
Before we,
that and being able to measure the incremental impact. It's not just performance within channel, but how is that channel also impacting your performance on the other channels as well? So thinking about marketing more holistically versus like in platform.
omnichannel.
Yep.
There's so much more to cover, but yeah, I'm trying to be respectful of your time, and I know how busy you are, and especially on a Monday morning, just trying to kick off a busy week. What I want to ask you before we kind of wrap up is, considering the Fed just decreased interest rates by 50 basis points, which is great, and probably going to move to a point of kind of stabilizing the economy. What are your projections for go-to-market executives, CFOs, CMOs over the coming year? Like, how are we still going to be cautious next year? Is it going to normalize? Is it going to speed up? How would you plan on average B2B roadmap in 2025, like very broadly speaking?
Well, I mean, even if others are playing it conservatively, if I was managing a budget, would get aggressive, right? Because there's no time like the present, especially if some people are pulling back or holding steady to capture that market share, right? I'm I'm a believer that like when others are kind of keeping their wallets closed or just pulling back entirely, is now's the time to capitalize, right? Let's steal those impressions and clicks and get those customers to convert on our side. I
It's
see
pretty
it as
much
an opportunity for a lot of marketers. Yeah.
it absolutely is. It's pretty much buying the dip principle by Warren Buffett. It's just capital. Don't buy when everyone else is bullish. When everyone's afraid, you pretty much buy at a discounted rate. So that's kind of how we are treating the market as well.
Yep.
And retention marketing is also that much more important. We actually see that from companies like Google and Oracle and Amazon and Meta. We get, new account managers that we weren't able to get a hold of, and like new discounted deals and kind of renewing contracts with tons of free stuff, just because retention marketing is important to keep churn down, even though growth may be stalled. So that's some food for thought here.
Well, it costs a lot less to keep a customer than it is to win a new one, right?
Amen. That's the spirit. Well, that's definitely been a great conversation, Chris. I
Yeah.
really
Thanks for having me on.
absolutely, that was definitely a pleasure. Where can people find you to learn more about you?
Yeah, playbookmedia.com is our new website. If you want to check it out, I am on there on the About Us. Yeah, feel free to reach out anytime.
Love it. Well, thanks again for your time, everyone. If you have any questions for Chris, drop them in the comments here. We can do some follow up kind of Q&A sessions afterwards in Slack as well. So if you like the show, like, subscribe, share with anyone else in the B2B space. And if you have anyone else you would like to invite for the show, also drop a comment and we're going to extend an invitation. Thanks, and see you in the next episode. Bye bye.